getting into boundaries, like, I just like didn't want to make it like boundaries are boundaries and respect my boundaries, which is, that's what we're saying. But also, like, what is a boundary? I think was a good place to start, because I think boundaries is one of those keywords that get used a lot, like gaslighting or one of these other things. And it's like
Place, safe space.
safe space or whatever. And it's like, I think that, like, let's dive into like, what does that mean? Other than just say the word is a key word, And one of the things, I was looking up some different definitions, and one that I really liked was boundaries are interpersonal limits shaped by personality, culture, and context.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
yes.
And I think that was basically saying, and I have several definitions, but that one I like because it was basing it off of boundaries can change depending on the context of the situation. It can depend on your culture. Like, some cultures are like kiss on the cheeks, some are like do something different, and then others are, also personality wise too, can shift from person to person of what people is acceptable, what are people limits with you.
Yeah. Like personal preferences. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And did you have anything that could kind of say with that?
No, not so much in like defining boundaries. I do think that there's like a range though of different types of boundaries. So I think that there are boundaries in a lot of things that we do. But again, I think because it's such a not trigger word, but like one of those words, like one of those reused words that it's kind of tiring to hear the word boundaries. But I think that there's boundaries you need to set in basically all of your relationships. And I think that it's important, there's sexual boundaries, there's financial boundaries, there's personal, there's friendship boundaries, there's work boundaries, marital, there's boundaries that you need to set with your own kids, which I don't think people really realize how important that is. But there's boundaries in like everything that we do. So I think that it's important to really understand that it's okay to set them. So I think it's good that we dive into like the different types of boundaries, because there's things that like even just learning this, it was like, oh, like reading about it more, I was like, oh yeah, there are boundaries that I need to set here, here, and here, like little reminders. And I think that it comes down to your own personal preference, but also self-reflecting and realizing like, how do things make you react? Like, is this bringing out a positive or a negative side of me? You know what I mean? And I think like recognizing that in all the different categories is important.
Exactly. And I think we all have, whether you had defined it or not, we all have boundaries with people. We've all had boundaries set with us. And whether you define it that way or not, that's what it is. It is such a way of life. And I think to understand that can help help your mental health, your, physical health, it's what protects you.
It affects your overall happiness. So what are the types of boundaries we should go over?
Okay, so I was trying to get like a good list, because I think we wrote down like a lot of ones that we really thought were smartest, but this is kind of set by some different resources that I found on the internet. And one of them, the like physical boundaries. So like privacy of personal space, preference of like physical touch, emotional boundaries, which is like respect for the other person's emotions and feelings, intellectual thoughts, intellectual beliefs, and ideas being respected by the other person. Time, this is a big one. Miss skipping out on the dentist. This is a big one for me because of my job. And then this is something that I really have to set a boundary with, because it can affect my income. And that's timeliness, and respecting other people's personal availability to spend time with you. And that's a big one too. Like, I get really caught up on like time stuff, because it's like, I got a lot of things to do in a day. I can't spend half my day waiting on you. There's like material ones, boundaries, which is like respecting someone's personal property. Don't come over and like rip up someone's couch or something. Spiritual, which is like respecting someone's personal beliefs and spiritual journeys, by respecting someone's religion, that kind of stuff. And then sexual boundaries, which is, I think pretty obvious. And that's the comfort with sexual touch and consent from one person to another.
I think I have recognized the areas that I've had to set boundaries for. So the main places that I myself have set boundaries for are my work, my friendships, my marriage, when I was single, my dating boundaries, as well as now, like I set boundaries with the kids. I think that it's important, like say, let's go into my dating boundaries. I think it's really important to set boundaries for yourself of what you will and will not accept or tolerate. And I think that that's also knowing your self-worth and knowing that you don't need to put up with certain things that don't make you comfortable. So if somebody's inconsistent with their communication, they're inconsistent with what they say they're going to do versus what they're actually doing, you're allowed to set that boundary to be like, especially in the early days, to be like, I am not accepting this. And you're allowed to communicate your boundaries as well, to be like, I am not somebody that can work off of the things that you're giving me right now. Like, I'm going to need more than that. And if you can't accept it, then like, that's it. I think really holding true to your boundaries is important. Otherwise, you're walking all over yourself, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And I did hear, like, there was one thing I found in researching this is that sometimes like narcissistic abuse can make you like have less boundaries, which can make you more vulnerable to certain situations. So that's, I think, is an important thing, because I think a lot of people have had some sort of narcissistic abuse in their life and have learned to not have boundaries with other people. And so I think boundaries are a great way to protect your own mental health, your physical health, to protect, your time, your everything. And especially in dating, especially with dating, and especially with new friendships or new people in your life, it is very important to have boundaries in that way.
I think also too, one thing that took me a while to admit, and I know is hard for a lot of other parents out there, but it is setting boundaries with your kids. And I think that that is so important because I have experienced a lot of mental burnout with the boys. Like just, I'm constantly with them, doing everything for them, making sure that they have everything they need. They're on time. They're the happiest that they can be. Like that's my goal, just to make them happy. And I find that because of that, I'm constantly just like emptying my cup into theirs and pouring and pouring and pouring. And I realize like there needs to be some sort of boundary where it's like after a certain time of day, it's like I need to set some time just to be like, hey, I'm taking some alone time right now. I need to go do this for like a half an hour. They're old enough where they can be self-sufficient. But even if they weren't old enough, I think that it's important to tell your partner or your support person to be like, you need to watch the kids right now because I physically and mentally need a break. And setting that boundary of like, when I'm taking my time for a little bit, like if I want to have a bath, like you don't need to come and knock on the door. It's not that important. You can wait till I come out. Do you know what I mean? Unless it's obviously like an emergency. But I had to really learn that like, it's okay. Like you're not a bad parent for like saying like, give me like a 30-minute timeout. Because I was hiding at one point from the kids, like hiding to take a break. And I'm like, this is messed up. Why am I hiding in my own home, eating an ice cream in my closet? Like, no, I'm setting these boundaries.
No, exactly. And I think it's good, especially with kids, when you set those boundaries, that teaches them how to set boundaries for themselves when they're older. And I think it's an important quality to know how to do that, because like there's a lot of people who don't. And then that causes a lot of issues in people's lives, and they don't know how to respect boundaries, and they don't know how to set boundaries for other people.
Have you ever been the person that you feel that someone has set a boundary for?
Yeah. I would say like in my wild partying days, there was people who set boundaries with me. You know what I mean? Like there was people in my life that got sober. They had to be more responsible. I don't know. They were like, you're too wild. I cannot. And it was also that kind of boundary of like, I remember there was a person that was very close with me, and he got sober and he cut me out of his life. And it was hard for me. But what I realized is that for his own health and for his life, to save his life from what he was everything involved in, he needed to set a boundary that I could not be in his life. And it was hard for me, but I had to accept it. And I've seen him a few times and I've said hello, and it's just as simple. And I know that as hard as it was, he had to do that.
Mhm.
And
And that's it sometimes, like, even if you don't want to let go of a certain relationship or friendship, you kind of have to sometimes in order to grow. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that that person like loves you dearly, but like just had to do it for their own personal gain, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure there's been plenty of other boundaries set with me, but that's one that I really think of. And then also, this is kind of in this topic right here is I've had friendships with narcissistic people, and I have seen where there has been like a toxic side of boundaries. Like, well, people, like, I've noticed that sometimes like a narcissistic person will weaponize boundaries against you to create them to be the center of attention at all times and for everything to go their way at all times. And I, that
What do you mean? Like what?
essentially, like, I've seen people that have a lot of narcissistic traits being like, it's always them going to pick the place, them going to pick the time, them going to pick everything. Like, you have no say in your own destiny and what you are doing because that's their boundary. And they have found that when they use that word boundary, that's a limit that people can't cross. So they've learned how to weaponize that against friends, and it should be like, yes, they use it as like a loophole. And it really sucks because it's like, you have to follow people's boundaries, but then also at a point, it's like, these are not just boundaries. This is you creating a situation for you to always be the center of attention and for everything to go 100% your way and to make zero compromise in any situation.
Yeah. It's boundary abuse.
It's boundary abuse.
It's boundary abuse.
Yeah.
I think it's important, like, when you're in a situation like that, it's like, how do you respect somebody's boundaries? But if their boundaries are like something like that, where, they're, they're boundary abusing or whatever, or you're just like, these boundaries stuck, or this isn't going to work for me. Like, how do you navigate a relationship like that? Whether it's work, friends, or anything, like, now it's like relating back to my dentist, like, how am I going to navigate my life now without being able to make a dentist appointment because my dentist set the boundary? It's like, you kind of have to decide at that point whether that person's boundary can like work in your life or not. And sometimes I think that that's a challenge.
Yeah, that is a challenge. And that's a part of it too. It's like, if I feel that if that's their boundary and they're not going to stick with it, and I just can't accept that, I guess like the friendship just can't really work, or you're going to have to set your own boundaries with them to be like, I can't go along with this all the time, And so I guess that there's a trickier side to it when it comes to that. And I just thought I thought of that, and I was thinking, and I wish I can't say the exact details, but I'm hoping I'm getting that across in a way that it can be weaponized against you, and to not think you're crazy, because sometimes that can be. And it's like, do you want to be friends with that person? And if so, you need to set a boundary with them of, I've learned to accept this for these reasons, and I have to keep an arm's length distance because I can't be hurt by this situation.
For sure. And I think that one thing that you really need to do, what you need to do is really reflect on, like, when do you know it's time to set a boundary? And I think that the biggest time is when it's judging by the way that you feel around someone. Because if you're around someone and you're constantly, like how you said, feel like they're weaponizing the power that they have over you by abusing their boundaries or whatever. But if you are in a position where it's like you are constantly just feeling unhappy, unheard, you're anxious around somebody, it doesn't mean that you have to cut them out. I mean, like, this could be a family member, this could be your own mother. And it's like, you don't need to totally cut them out. You don't need to never speak to them or never see them. You just need to realize that, like, there is something that is hurting you or triggering you or like making you super anxious. And if you're feeling that in any of your relationships, whether it's work, family, whatever, that's when you need to stop and assess and be like, why is this affecting me? Is it this only person? Like, you kind of need to go through the who, what, when, where, why, and how type situation. And then really consider, like, what are my boundaries here? Like, maybe someone that you see 7 days a week who is like constantly making you anxious or whatever, maybe that's someone that you have to cut back to like 4 times a week, or you need to, not see the certain friend as much, or whatever it may be.
Exactly. Have anyone set boundaries with you?
I think so. I think that there's been like one or two friends that I think have maybe outgrown me, which is fine. I feel like their boundaries are very much like they want to see me, but maybe in small doses. I could kind of like sense that the way that the plans are made or the way that they kind of go about hanging out with me seems very just like, I'm like, okay, like clearly there's some sort of boundary. I don't understand why, because I don't feel like I've done anything. However, I think it's more of a sense of like, they've maybe just outgrown me as a person, which is fine. I've outgrown some of my friends, like it happens. So I definitely think that people set boundaries with me.
Yeah, and I was just thinking too. I think when I was going through a lot of my health problems, like there was a while where I was just very depressed and I was very negative. And I think people definitely set boundaries with me of like, I can't be listening to your negativity all the time. And I get that. But that was something I think about that was done, set against me for that reason. And that could be a thing too. Be self-aware of how you make other people feel because they may set a boundary of, you know, how close you can be to them. One thing I did want to say too is if you're like unclear of like, how do I set a boundary with somebody? Because I think some people don't know, and I think I had found this 3-step guide on setting a boundary with somebody because it's kind of hard to describe how to do it. But I thought this was a really good way of saying it. And they were like, step one, be as clear and straightforward as possible. Like, do not raise your voice. Don't like make it a fight, but just be like clear, straightforward. Like this is the situation right here. And then state your need or request directly in terms of what you'd like rather than what you don't want or like. So don't be like, don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. It's like, I would like it if you treated me this way, or I would like it if this happened.
Yeah.
And step 3 is accept any discomfort or that arises as a result, whether it's guilt, shame, or remorse. Know that there may be a reaction. Know that someone may be a little upset, but also don't feel shame about that because you do have to protect yourself and you do have to, it's a healthy thing to have set these boundaries.
I think you can also set silent boundaries. That's mostly how I set my boundaries. I don't tell anyone that I'm setting a boundary around them, except for like the or Michael. But like if I'm setting a boundary with a friend, I don't speak it because it's not necessarily anything that that person could be doing wrong. It's just maybe it's just not like aligning with where I am right now, and I just naturally act out my own boundaries.
Yeah, I
Do you know what I
that.
mean?
Yeah,
It's like I can't see this person, I can't party with this person anymore, this person, whatever. It's like I will naturally just start maybe coming around them less or doing whatever. And I just set my own boundaries that way without expressing it.
exactly. And I think that's a great point of it too, is that a lot of boundaries are set silently and use the clues, the context clues to pick up on that. But also, if this is someone that needs to stay in your life, there's someone like sometimes you do need to address it straight on like that to be like, this isn't going to work. And that's the thing too. We were kind of wanted to bring up about how to deal with people who have no boundaries, and that's something that I was saying to that was one, if you have to, may have to say like directly, like don't be like, you don't have no boundaries, girl, but like be like, I'm sorry, I have to set this like kind of boundary, or I need you to not do this to me, because there is a lot of people who do not know about boundaries, and I've witnessed a lot of it, people that just the concept was gone on them, and it can be overwhelming. And I think sometimes I've had to, build the wall around myself and be like, this is a limit that I'm not letting you cross. And it's a complicated situation when you have that, but you have to, and unfortunately, I feel like when you're around someone who doesn't have any boundaries, you are on guard, because you don't know what's coming next.
Exactly. And especially like when people, the worst part is that like if you express a boundary to someone and they continuously keep doing it, and if it's something that you're like, look, when you treat me this way or when you do this and they keep doing it, that is a lack of respect. It's a judgment or it's like a character flaw of their own. Like clearly they're not respecting you. And that's when you kind of just need to be like, okay, I've had enough. And you don't need to accept people. You don't need to accept people's habits. You don't need to accept their actions. You don't need to accept their words. Like, you can eliminate, and that's fine. Like, if you have set a clear boundary and they're abusing it or just ignoring it, like, it's okay to be like, fuck this, I'm done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another point too we want to bring up to that is that sometimes you can outgrow boundaries. And,
Yeah.
maybe the friendship boundaries that I had with me and Kris, like we've become so close over the years. I usually at my house so many times that I think we've broken down a lot of barriers and have, there's less boundaries there because we would trust each other more, respect each other more. There's a lot to that. And I wanted to say too that, like, for me, something that was a boundary with me that's really hard that I've worked on, and I think I really struggled with hugging, or like, especially there's some people too, like they do the double cheek kiss. I had butted someone's grandma the last time I tried to do the double cheek kiss. I can't do it. Like, it freaks me out. I'm like, this is not my face, But that's a cultural thing where that is very normal and very acceptable. But that for my culture, that's a little hard for me to handle it. But the hugging, I don't know why I have such an aversion to people hugging me. But then over time, I have lessened that boundary because maybe the cultural that I live in now is different than what was before, and now I'm like, give me a hug. I don't care, but that was something that's really hard for me. Another one that's really hard for me is the I love you. I don't know why, but that was like a weird thing for me. And I had set that boundary of like, I don't say that,
I remember I disrespected your boundary because, like, when Kyle and I first started being friends, I would say, I love you. And literally you were like, I don't say that. But guess who says it now?
I did. I know.
Down Kyle.
But that was something like I wanted to get rid of that boundary. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was my choice. But that is something I still work on. That is still, because it's my choice to like let go of that a little bit. I don't know why, but it was like such a thing to me because I don't know. I don't want to say maybe I did. It's just not something that was ever said. And in my head, it was like such a big thing to say, I love you. And I'm like, everyone's just like throwing that around. And now it's like random people that I see, like, I don't know, they're like, I love you. I love you too.
Love you.
But that was a boundary that I had set for a long time and that I chose to like lighten up on. But the key word is I chose to lighten up.
You chose. Yes.
Exactly.
And I didn't break you down.
Yeah. Is there like any boundaries that you've outgrown?
I'm trying to think, to be honest. Like, I feel like I don't know. I feel like not so much that I've outgrown, but I think I keep adding things to my roster. I think that I'm constantly recognizing certain boundaries but I can't think of anyone. And I'm sure I have outgrown certain ones, although I can't think of any, to be honest. I don't have an exact situation.
Oh, yeah. But what are some of the boundaries that you set with people?
I'm kind of like, I'm kind of someone that it depends on each person, to be honest.
Yeah.
So some people I can allow in my home and like they can do whatever they want and like whatever. And then there's some people where it's like, I'm not that comfortable. Like, I'm not going to bring you into my home and like have, a sleepover and like do all that. Like, I feel like it's, for me, the boundaries that I set are like per person and based off of my comfort level with them. I feel like there's a boundary in which I don't allow certain disrespect towards me. I think before I used to be such a pushover that I was really scared to stand up for myself. I was really scared to self-advocate. I wouldn't, do certain things out of fear of pissing someone off. And now I'm like, no, I'm an adult. I can hold my own. If this person's going to be upset with me, that's fine. But I need to learn that, like, I can cross a certain boundary of myself of like, okay, I'm not allowed to speak up, or I'm not allowed to, just make everybody, like, I just have to make everyone happy. And I feel like in doing that, I think that it's set a level of respect that I have around myself that kind of just not, I don't want to say dictate, but kind of just like gives an example of like how I like to be treated and what I will and will not tolerate at all from anybody.
Yeah. I was thinking like some of the examples of boundaries that I have with people is, one, there's certain people that I'm like, we're not talking about politics. I'm just like, but like some people I'm like, let's do it. But there's some people where I'm like, I've had to tell people like, listen, do not bring this up to me again. I do not want to have this conversation with you at all, because I love our friendship and I love whatever. We do not bring it up. And then I have a lot of boundaries with clients because I tend to allow clients to walk all over me, and which is a thing. And I've had to like not crack down because I don't want to be that person, because I know some people have maybe a little too much boundaries with their clients, but you definitely like don't waste my time. That's a big one. My number one boundary that gets under my skin the most is don't waste my time. And that's a big one. Another thing is like I've had issues with people that like will always jump to pay for stuff, or like dinner or drinks, whatever, and then they use that against you.
My God, yes.
Yeah. And it's like, well, I want to pay for stuff. Like, but then they're like, but I paid for this for you and I paid for that for you. I'm like, I know, but you wouldn't let me. Like, I don't do something nice if you're going to use it as collateral against me. So that's about, there's certain boundaries I have. There's a few people in my life where I'm like, no, you're not paying for a thing. Like, we're not doing this. Like, you buy a drink, I buy a drink, because there's a tally being happening and the tally is going to be used against me. Having a roommate, there's me and my roommate have a lot of boundaries. We lived together for almost 8 years or so. And that's because we respect each other's boundaries and we have set them with each other. And I think that that's why we are, have such a great relationship and have lived together so long.
I agree with that though, because I think like when you live with someone, like even though Michael's my husband, he is also like my forever living partner. So like I think especially when you live with someone, setting those boundaries where it's like, these are the things that like I cannot live with. And these are the things that like, especially with the boys and Michael, and they're all boys and whatever, it's like, these are my boundaries and like you cannot cross them. And you have to have these uncomfortable conversations sometimes. Sometimes they're uncomfortable and sometimes it's a little bit of, calling one another out a little bit, but not in a way that's malicious. It's just like, what you're doing is upsetting me. Like, I cannot do this, and that's cool if I can't do this, but like, we need to talk about it.
Exactly.
And
another example, I was thinking there was a person in my life that we became depression buddies, and we were just being negative and depressed together and hating the world and hating everything. And then eventually I'm just like, I can't do this. Like, I need to get out of this kind of situation. And I try to set a boundary of like, we just can't be negative nonstop. And that couldn't be reached. And unfortunately, the friendship had to end because I was like, I can't be hanging out every evening and just being negative, never depressed, hate the world, hate this, hate whatever, because it was bringing me down. Like, other friends of mine were like, something's going on. Like, you're really negative, and it was because of this. And I had to move on. But my biggest thing is, and this is like something that's for me annoying to other people, is when I wake up in the morning, like I plan my day. Like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And I procrastinate sometimes. I push things back. And so when people start springing things on me midday, I'm like, this wasn't in the daily itinerary. Like, I've procrastinated something else all day long and I need to get it done. So I need to I can't do that. Like, that drives me crazy.
That's a dead hint towards me.
Kidding. No, it's not.
Yeah, I know. I'm kidding.
Imagine I just spent the whole time like being like, there's the things about each other.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about you.
This whole time we're just calling each other out on our shit. Like, yeah, we need to set some boundaries. Like, this is how Kyle and I set our boundaries. We do a whole episode speaking about what we want and need, just in general. But it really is targeted towards one another.
We just made an entire episode like being passive aggressive against each other.
Seriously.